This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Welcome. You've heard and read the spin the media and the politicians have put on the issues of the day. To get the correct spin on what's going on in North Carolina, let's introduce you to our panel of experts. They include Syndicated columnist and author John Hood, former state senator and former chair of the State Board of Education Howard Lee, former House Speaker Josephus Mavretic, and Chris Fitzsimon from NC Policy Watch. I want to begin this show by thanking Brad Crone for sitting in with me last week. I had an opportunity to see the tape from the show, and I thought it was a great show, and I thought Brad did a good job. But thank you, Brad. Well, this week we're going to be talking about the new administrations. We're going to be talking about UNC Strategic Plan, and an audit finds Medicaid problems. And of course, we're going to ask the panel to tell us something we don't know. Let's get started. This past Friday, Donald Trump was inaugurated as the 45th president, promising action on the campaign promises he made during the election. We also have a new administration in Raleigh, and we want our panel to discuss the potential impacts both are going to have in the next few months. Joe Mavretic, on the campaign trail, Donald Trump made many promises, chief among them the pledge to repeal and replace Obamacare. We know that Congress is already considering a repeal, so the question is, when do you think this is going to happen? How is it going to impact North Carolina? And doesn't this put most health care discussions on hold until we know more?
Let me take it backwards. I think, yes, it does put them on hold, and I think wisely so. I think one of the things that the Republicans in the General Assembly did was to be very cautious about buying into the federal deal about how much money they were going to pay for us in the long run. And I think it's wise for us to back off. And I think at the national level, there's going to be significant effort within the next 60 days.
You think it's going to be that soon?
Absolutely.
Wow. Howard, another promise that he made was to reform Medicare and Medicaid specifically. The suggestion is we might be seeing block grants to the states instead of the two-thirds, one-third kind of funding formula we've traditionally used. Is it safe to say that we're going to have some pretty big changes here, and how might those block grants impact health care?
Yeah, I'm not sure the block grants will actually come into being. I believe there are going to be some major changes. I'm a lot more optimistic that the president-elect is going to take a more aggressive stand toward trying to be more inclusive and protect people. And so Medicaid, to me, is going to be one of those areas where I think we'll see some very positive movement.
Chris, if President Trump's able to follow through on his campaign promises, isn't the basic relationship between the federal government and the state governments throughout this nation going to change?
Well, I think if he follows through, certainly with block grants, they'll change. And I'm not quite as optimistic as Senator Lee about what's going to happen. Although President Trump did say last week, I think, that everybody will have health care insurance, and the plan will cover everybody, and it won't cost more, and the premiums will be low, and the deductible will be low, and pre-existing conditions will be covered. Well, I haven't seen that plan yet, and I think a lot of people.
There's a chicken in every pot.
Well, I mean, it seemed a little silly that he can do that, and especially come up with it in 60 days when Republicans have had 7 years and they've had a variety of bills, but not one big bill. One thing I mentioned on last week's show I think is important. He goes into office as the most unpopular new president in a generation, many years, and so the question is if his popularity rating, which is down now in the 30s. In some polls, at what point does that become a political liability for North Carolina Republicans? And I think that will influence some of the decisions that are made.
Let's transition over to the state, John. Roy Cooper has wasted no time in asserting himself as governor in the state. What's your early assessment of Cooper?
Well, I think that other than the Medicaid stumble, and it was a significant stumble to claim to have the authority as governor to expand Medicaid quickly before the Democratic administration leaves Washington. I mean, I just think it was a horrible decision on his part, ruined weeks of narrative that Democrats and liberals had created about the separation of powers and all sorts of other things. But leaving that aside for a second, the major issue that Roy Cooper has to deal with regarding the legislature, the Republican legislature, there's two of them. One of them is the budget. The agencies are right now preparing and passing forward, and that's going to be something that any new administration in the first year has to kind of scramble to get its own imprint on a budget that has already been partially hatched by the previous administration. Sure. And then the other piece has to do with something new, which is confirmation of cabinet secretaries. I do not believe that the Republican legislature is going to go after all of Cooper's cabinet secretaries, but they may significantly challenge one or two of them, and I think that's something that Cooper's maybe not prepared for yet.
I was going to ask Joe and Howard about this, because you guys served in the legislature for a long time. The Constitution says cabinet secretaries can be appointed. We have yet, Bill Rabin, the Senate Rules Chairman, has yet to release the guidelines for exactly what this is going to be. Now, presumably it's going to be conflicts of interest and financial interest and background checks and so forth like that. But what happens if this legislature really wants to start getting political with this? You think that's appropriate?
Well, first of all, I think they are going to get political with it. And I think John's absolutely right. I think they would be very careful about picking and choosing who they're going to go after. And that's good political.
You agree with that?
I think we'll see a rerun of what we've seen on the federal level, and I certainly think there are going to be a lot of digging in areas that we probably otherwise wouldn't know about. But I'm just concerned that I'm not sure the legislature knows what it's getting into when it starts talking about confirming all these different cabinet people, taking up time going through all of this when it could be used for other things.
But in this process, aren't we kind of putting state government on hold, Chris? Because, I mean, acting secretaries can be acting secretaries, but you served as a secretary before. They can't really take any bold action until the permanent secretary gets.
Well, I guess we'll see, won't we? It depends on how long the General Assembly takes, and I'm distressed that we're shifting Raleigh to be more like Washington. I mean, I think that I didn't agree with Governor.
Howard said that weeks ago.
Well, I didn't agree with Governor McCrory's appointees, but I thought he had a right to appoint who he wanted to run his agencies, and I hope that the Senate doesn't stand as a roadblock unless there's some egregious, unqualifying thing, not just somebody's views, because the people of North Carolina elected Roy Cooper, and they elected him to appoint people to carry out his agenda.
Okay, now, a couple of things. If it does take a little bit longer with the confirmation and big things can't be done in the departments, that's not such a bad thing. The second thing is that I think we already know what the next at least 2, probably 4 years in Raleigh is going to be like. The General Assembly is going to pass a bill, the governor's going to veto it, the General Assembly is going to override the veto, and the governor's going to turn to his Democratic Attorney General, and they're going to decide which ones they want to fight in court, and then the courts are going to make decisions. And if the people out here that watch NC Spin aren't prepared for this, then they need to get prepared, because that's what's going to happen.
John, there are lots of pieces of legislation that have been passed that are really kind of on hold right now because of court stays and lacks of decisions about that, particularly as it regards to Medicaid expansion, the relationship between the superintendent and the State Board of Education, the Ethics Commission and the State Board of Elections. News and Observer columnist this week said we've become a government by litigation. I don't know whether you saw that or not, but do you agree with that assessment?
That is certainly possible. That's the scenario. That's the set of scenarios that Joe's outlining, that everything's going to be litigated. That's probably true. But of the ones that you just mentioned, the one that has the most immediate effect is the governance of the Department of Public Instruction. The Elections Board, Ethics Board issue is important, but a lot of that work is coming up later for the next election cycle. And
unless we have elections in November.
Right, but even so, there's some time for that to get worked out. But the DPI question is right now. You've got a superintendent that was elected. You've got a State Board of Education appointed by previous governors who were elected, and working that out quickly so that the new administration, that Mark Johnson, who's the superintendent, can actually have hires and run a department it's the similar challenge that Cooper has getting his people confirmed.
Final question I want to ask in this segment, and I'll ask Howard and Joe both. Last week it was announced that state revenues have exceeded projections by some $332 million. What does that say to you, and what does it mean to about what might happen in this legislature, Howard?
Well, I think it certainly is a positive in that they have the resources to work with. I'm hoping that the legislature will see the benefit of enhancing support for our educational system. Our public schools are really struggling, and being out among these schools on a regular basis, I see the depression that's set in, and we can't afford that.
What do you think it means, Joe?
Well, I think it means that we're doing a little bit better in the state economy, but understand that 95 to 96% of the state's revenue is already spent in the continuing budget. So we only have about 4% to work with, and $340 million, nice to have, but it's not a lot of money.
Yeah. All right. Here's a reminder, there's much more on our website, ncspin.com or ncspin on Facebook. You'll find video footage not seen anywhere else, perspective pieces from our panel, and my weekly columns. So don't forget to sign up to receive also our free weekly email newsletter, Spin Cycle. Get more balanced debate from the Old North State on ncspin.com, ncspin on Facebook, or on Twitter at ncspintweets. After these messages, we're going to talk about a new UNC strategic plan.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
The slogan on our family farm is growing the next generation. It means using innovative technology to conserve water and increase yields. It embodies our passion for providing food and fiber for our neighbors near and far. It represents our desire to take care of our employees, our land, and to leave a better place for our children. Farm life isn't easy, but it's a good life, and I love what I do.
I help educate and inspire visually impaired students to strive for a brighter future.
I make sure visitors to the North Carolina Zoo take a walk on the wild side.
And I make sure that the fuel you buy is a quality product from pipeline to pump.
I support small businesses in North Carolina by matching them with hard-working, well-trained employees.
I make sure the roads you drive on are safe.
Scenic, the one voice speaking in support of the men and women who are making North Carolina great.
We now return to NC Spin.
The Board of Governors of the UNC system approved a strategic plan that includes enrolling more low-income students, more rural students, improving five-year graduation rates, increasing the graduates in high-need fields like teaching, and limiting tuition rate increases. Howard Lee, as former chair of the State Board of Education and someone who follows education issues closely, what's your reaction to this new UNC strategic plan?
Having read the plan, not completely, but certainly scanned over it, I'm very impressed with the thought and the process that has unfolded in bringing this forward. President Spellings did something similar to this on a national level when she was Secretary of Education. And the group that came in and did this study is the same group that came in under my direction when I was chairman of the State Board and did the same thing for our public school systems. I think it lays out some clear benchmarks and some directions, and I'm delighted that the Board of Governors is taking this on and moving forward. But I will say one thing: I'm still disappointed that we still have siloed education in North Carolina. The university system, the community college, and the public schools, and I think we've got to break those silos.
You need to keep singing this song, Howard. Sooner or later, somebody's going to join the chorus. There's no question. Joe.
Well, let me pick up on what Howard said. If the mission is to graduate good citizens with the skills needed in the marketplace, well, graduation rates is exactly what the university ought to be talking about. I'm disappointed that it's a 5-year target rather than a 4-year target. And the other thing is, graduate students with the skills needed in the marketplace, one of the primary missions of the university system is to graduate teachers. And until they start graduating, at least 3,000 to 4,000 teachers more every year, we're going to have problems with public schools.
Well, that raises the question, though, Chris. What do we do to get young people to go into the teaching field? We've done away with the Teaching Fellows program.
Well, I think we need the Teaching Fellows program or something like it to be restored. I also think if we talk a lot on the show about the beauty of the free market, if kids aren't signing up to be teachers and they sign up to other jobs that can pay them more, we have to do a lot more to increase pay to get kids to end up to be school teachers. I'm not sure, I think the university system shares part of the blame, but if kids don't want to go into education because they don't feel respected, they don't make a lot of money, they can't afford the jobs, then we have to figure out at the other side.
John, there were 11 goals in this strategic plan. One of President Spelling's big agenda items has been making state-supported universities more affordable. But it seems to me that whenever this topic comes up, and prices and cost of tuition and so forth like that, particularly our flagship universities, are comparing themselves to universities in other states, particularly sometimes larger universities in more prosperous states. Is that fair? Is it an apple-to-apple comparison? How do we gauge affordability?
You want to compare. You want to look at the tuition cost as a percentage of the total cost. because lots of people think about it in those terms. If you're a family, if you're a parent, if you're a student, that's what you're ending up paying or not paying. But let's be very clear about the difference between price and cost. We can make the price lower by spending more tax dollars on the university. That doesn't make universities less expensive to run. It makes it more expensive. So I hope, and I think if you look at the report, they aren't just talking about, well, this is about keeping tuition low by throwing more tax money into the system. They're talking about the actual cost of delivering education. That has to be moderated. That in the higher education sector as a whole has been escalating rapidly, it's like healthcare, far faster than most other areas of life, and that is not a sustainable trend.
Howard, two of the goals, more minority students, higher minority graduation rates, more rural students, and higher rural graduation rates. Now, let me flip that on the other side. I'm a parent of a child in Wake County. My child has just been knocking the bottom out of education. ACT scores that are incredible, tremendous grades, extracurricular activities. How are you going to explain to me why rural children have preference to getting into some of these schools when mine can't get in?
Well, I think one of the concerns is that these rural kids simply don't have the support from their local school systems to help them rise to the same level. But I've never been one who believed that you should punish a kid who's performing at a higher level in favor of a kid who's not. I think we have an obligation to move into the rural areas so those kids can become as competent as any kid coming out of Wake County.
And I'm not being critical of the process. I'm just speaking as if I was a parent that had a child that was doing very well and wanted to get in.
I think you're exactly correct. I really believe that we're talking about socioeconomic differences, that kids in the rural areas are going to be a lot poorer and not going to have access to resources, so they can't compete with a Wake County kid. But even if we came to Wake County, walk across town from one section of town on the other side, and one school's better than the other.
The other thing that keeps coming up is you talk about the top 1 or 2 campuses in the university system. The real issue is the bottom half of the university system, which by any national ranking puts us in the bottom half of America. Now, if you want to really do something with the university system, the first thing you do is what Clemson did decades ago and say, this is the cap for the research universities. I don't care what the number is, we'll give you a year to reach the cap. And after that, no more students there. Push those students into other campuses.
Chris, very telling question this past week. We're talking about these strategic plans and goals, and President Spellings last week said that she was encountering a lot of situations where top-level candidates to become professors, researchers, faculty of these universities are withdrawing their applications because they don't want to come to North Carolina because of HB2.
Well, right, and she mentioned actually that gay or transgender faculty members, even though they're very accomplished, certainly don't want to come here, and others who are sensitive to those issues. I think it's the latest evidence that this is a huge problem, whether we want to talk about it or not. It's having a much bigger impact on our state than I think a lot of people realize.
So, John, what's your takeaway from this strategic plan?
I think that the effort that went into it is evident. Many of the goals are praiseworthy and aspirational, but when it comes down to the legislature buying into some of the pieces that are expensive, they're going to have to make a much clearer case for the costs and the benefits.
All right, after these messages, we're going to talk about an audit that finds Medicaid problems.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
The cost of everything has gone up dramatically over the last 75 years. With one exception, keeping electricity affordable. That's the power of your co-op membership. Learn more at togetherwesave.com.
North Carolina's Touchstone Energy Cooperatives, looking out for you.
You sleep on concrete till your body get immune to concrete.
My mom got my brother and I up and said, come on, we're leaving.
I became homeless in the beginning of this year.
When I was about 4 or 5 years old, our house caught fire.
I used to see my brother. If he see me, he'd turn and go the other direction.
We did the only thing that we could think of, and we went to a Salvation Army shelter.
You know, we don't have this, like, what's your background look like? We just say, what do you need?
I remember the man from the Salvation Army coming down with a box of clothes.
The Salvation Army officer bought my brother and I an ice cream cone.
Last week, my brother walked up to me, and he just started a conversation.
Today I've given my life to the Salvation Army because I remember what somebody did for me, my brother, and my mom over 30 years ago.
The Salvation Army for me means hope.
Compassion.
Family.
Support.
We now return to NC Spin.
State Auditor Beth Wood recently released an audit that shows that the Department of Health and Human Services is not providing enough oversight to counties in determining eligibility and making timely decisions regarding people applying to Medicaid. Chris, while DHHS is delegated to each county the processing of applications, Auditor Wood says the ultimate responsibility and for timeliness and accuracy resides with DHHS. What's your reaction to this?
Well,
audit?
a couple things. First of all, I think Governor McCrory, as he was leaving office, and a lot of Republicans have said that they have fixed Medicaid in North Carolina, and then this audit comes out saying we have all these eligibility issues. I do think we need a standard way to determine eligibility, and it's the state's responsibility to do that. And I hope that the General Assembly and the new HHS Secretary and the Governor will figure out a way to make sure that we're doing that.
But John, specifically, the business of delegating to the 100 counties the application and acceptance process, is that the correct way to be doing this?
Well, I'm not sure there's an alternative other than using counties as the way to determine eligibility at the front end of the system. There could be more standardization. One of the ways the audit really shocked a lot of people was the pretty wide variation in error rates.
Yes.
And it wasn't the
From
smaller
5% up to 18%.
It wasn't the smaller counties that were the problem. It was actually the larger urban counties that tended to have the larger errors.
But Joe, Auditor Wood says the state isn't providing enough oversight. Now, does that mean that she thinks that the state ought to look at each application, each piece of paper, handle each one to make sure it's properly, and if that's the case, why do we need to let the counties do it?
No. First of all, two things. If you're an auditor and you do an audit, you ought to expect to find some things that you can talk about in your audit, number one. Number two, anytime you, in the public sector, if you have a unit that's responsible for doing something and a higher unit responsible for making sure that happens, there's always going to be slop between the two. And when you add the federal government on top, they have slop between two entities before the doers get to do their work. It comes with the turf.
Is slop a technical term?
It's a technical term. That's right.
Howard,
has to do with pigs.
Given the results of this article, this audit, what does it tell you about Governor Cooper's efforts to expand Medicaid on a larger basis? What does it say about how well our state is actually administering the Medicaid program now?
Well, I think,
or does it say anything?
Well, I think we've known for a long time that we've had some challenges administering this program. I've been very disappointed that we haven't been able to serve the number of people who need to have the service, and certainly I think that's going to have to be looked at in a more realistic fashion. And if we do that, then it seems to me the counties would be the place to carry this out.
All right. After these messages, we're going to ask the panel to tell us something we don't know.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
It's a fact. Patients who receive care in the medical home from a trusted family physician reduce healthcare costs through prevention, early detection, and affordable management of high-cost chronic diseases.
Every dollar invested in healthcare matters. Let's invest them wisely, building on North Carolina's medical home model. Better health begins with a medical home, a trusted family physician, the best return on our healthcare investment. Learn about the importance of medical homes at ournchealthcare.com.
I help educate and inspire visually impaired students to strive for a brighter future.
I make sure visitors to the North Carolina Zoo take a walk on the wild side.
And I make sure that the fuel you buy is a quality product from pipeline to pump.
I support small businesses in North Carolina by matching them with hard-working, well-trained employees.
I make sure the roads you drive on are safe.
Scenic, the one voice speaking in support of the men and women who are making North Carolina great.
We now return to NC Spin.
When you see me on the street, the first thing you tell me is that you love this coming segment of the show where we ask the panel to tell us something we don't know. Joe Mavretic, we'll start with you.
Edwin Gill.
Edwin Gill.
Edwin Gill in 1953 was sworn in with the Bible. Harlan Boyles in 1977 was sworn in with the same Bible. For the next two people, Moore and
Cowell,
we don't know about the Bible. This year, Dale Falwell was sworn in with the Gill Bible. 3 questions or puzzles for our viewers. The first is, where's the Bible now? Second, where did Dale Falwell get the Bible? And 3, where did Gill get the Bible to start with?
Oh, my. Where's Waldo? Chris Fitzsimon, tell us something we don't know.
Well, we referred to the lawsuit between the Department of Public Instruction, well, actually the State Board of Education, which, remember, is controlled by Republicans. Bill Kobe is the Republican chair, and the new superintendent, Mark Johnson. And actually, I've had people tell me privately, even Republicans tell me, this is the one lawsuit that they're sure how it's going to come out. The legislature is going to lose. The State Board of Education it clearly has the authority in the Constitution to administer the public school system. It's a matter of time, but I think this one could be solved very quickly, and the superintendent.
All right, I'm going to hold you to that promise. John Hood, tell us something we don't know.
Speaking of education, watch very closely how this initial round of bonuses that were authorized by the legislature in the previous session. There's a series of different bonuses for different levels of teachers, 3rd grade reading teachers, some other teachers. So far, there's been a lot of pushback, but I don't think enough to endanger that program. You will see fights on this issue between the legislature and Governor Cooper.
Howard Lee, tell us something we don't know.
Well, I go back to education and talk about schools, and I'm very impressed with the number of schools that are moving toward trying to act more like charters, and that the schools systems are beginning to give them very greater flexibility. And I'd like to talk more about that at some point in the future.
Yeah, and particularly after what we saw about some of the, one charter school in particular, graduating people who weren't qualified to doing it. Well, we'll do that. I promise you we'll do that on an upcoming show. You've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, give your feedback, and read my weekly column, be sure to visit our website, ncspin.com, or catch NC Spin on Facebook. And join us next week when we'll have more balanced debate for the Old North State. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
Join us next week and get the spin on issues facing our state.